whatever the demo-itis of like before a demo, like rehearsalitis, I guess. That's the way that they've played it with the band 200 times in rehearsal. They played it on stage 50 times, and they go into the studio. And if you want to make a change that is going to be objectively, helping to tell the story better, helping to communicate the vision more, it's a bit more of a struggle because they have to consciously try to do something other than what they've spent all this time doing. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
We are both tired. We are both in cranky moods, but we are going to fix that today. We're going to bring each other back up out of the depths of...
Bring it back in.
Yeah. Out of the depths of misery and existential dread. And
I was going to say Mordor, but I don't know if you're a Lord of the Rings nerd. But
I am. Feels like Mordor these days.
Yes.
But we are going to jump right into it because we are also going to use this episode, this conversation, as our way to cheer each other up because we need it. And sometimes talking about nerdy shit is what makes us happy. And I hate to admit that. It's rare for me,
don't want to admit it, but
today's one of those days where I'm excited to talk about nerdy shit. Yeah. Well, it's this particular nerdy shit is something I do really care about. And it is vocal processing. I don't know why I'm talking like a AM radio DJ right now.
It's because you are an AM radio DJ right now, Carl. You've shifted gears. I am. And that's what you are. Like, you have to be proud of it, I guess. Or something.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
I'll calm myself down. But anyway, vocal processing. I know in the past couple episodes when we talked about drums,
we don't want to start with like the vocal recording.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I felt like in the previous episodes, we started with like the production phase of it and then got into mixing. And for myself, I don't do tracking anymore, like at all. I hate it. Even when I'm playing the instruments, if I'm playing drums on something, like I refuse to track myself. I need to go somewhere else and have somebody else worry about it. And vocals, I just haven't tracked somebody's vocals. That wasn't like a quick for fun thing with a friend in years. So I have a lot of thoughts about like the editing and vocal production stuff, but when it comes to actual straight up like voice into microphone, other than recording podcasts like this, I don't really do much these days. So I want to tee it up, toss it to you, and I want to hear what your process has been like lately and if that's changed over the past few months or a few years.
Yeah. Okay. So I just also want to just like straight up say I'm at my neighbor's apartment and recording into my MacBook Pro speakers because of all kinds of like scheduling issues. So it's like ironic talking about vocals when like my voice probably sounds worse than ever on this podcast. What's my approach to processing vocals? Okay, so should we start with editing or should we start with mixing? I guess editing is the obvious choice, right?
I think so.
Yeah, to go back to the beginning. I mean, I have to touch a little bit on the recording process because I track vocals for almost everything I'm working on if I'm, recording and mixing it. And I really try to like, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I try to get as good a performance as I can. I'm not one of these guys that gets, give me 4 takes and I'll just choose the best stuff and make it work. I really try to get every single section how I want it, or as close as the singer can get it to how I want it. And that's, you have to read the room and see what the artist is actually capable of recording. But based on the limitations of the actual singer, getting it as close as I can. Yeah. And I'm much more pedantic about lead vocals than I am about harmonies. Harmonies, I don't mind tuning and doing crazy shit to make them work. Just give me something that's like close enough and like rhythmically cool and I'll make it work. But lead vocals, I really try to get as good as possible. So once it's time for editing. I'm a Melodyne guy. I really like Melodyne. It's the most transparent one. And I think something that I'm sort of...
Well, can I stop you for a second? Because I do have like a tracking question for you. When back years ago when I was also doing a lot of vocal tracking, I knew that there were going to be some artists that really preferred to do lots and lots of just like straight through top to bottom performances or like doing as few punches as possible. And then there are some artists that really preferred to like focus on a particular section and just really really nail that down. So I know every artist is going to have their different preferences, but for you as the engineer and as like the producer brain in that moment, do you have a process that you really are more drawn to, and why?
Hmm. I don't think they make a difference to me. I like them both, and it really depends on what the artist is more comfortable doing. So, if I'm working with an artist that can really sing, we'll usually do full takes. And then maybe we'll focus on like a specific thing at the end. And then with a vocalist who's a little bit newer, a little less experienced, or just needs a little extra coaching, we'll probably take it section by section. And sometimes, we'll start with the verse and we'll realize, we got to warm your voice up, and we'll skip to the chorus and we'll go back to the verse later. So it really is, I don't know if I have a preference. I mean, I guess my preference is it's an amazing vocalist so we can just do a take, right? But that's not typical. So, yeah, because I don't know if I prefer doing multiple full takes versus like individual. I guess I prefer individual sections over multiple full takes if it's more than like two full takes.
Yeah.
If you're Aretha Franklin, you give me two full takes, perfect. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Otherwise it's hard. Like I'm constantly thinking about, oh, I like that part, and I'm trying to like on the fly comp things together and choose the folders, the takes, and like, the way that I really like the Logic's comping thing, and so like
Yeah.
I'm on the fly just doing that. So it is a little easier to do that section by section if the singer's not capable of doing like full takes. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't really
And I
have a
think,
preference, a
yeah, I
strong
think there's also a
preference.
benefit, depending on how you break it up, there's also the benefit of being able to give direction and give notes on individual sections and not have to like overload them with, don't forget this thing and then this thing. And then when you get here, try this. And then when it's like over the course of a 3-minute song, like if there are ideas that you have, it's almost like trying. I've found that unless they are, Aretha Franklin, who I have not worked with, obviously, unless they're like at a really, really crazy high level, it's almost like too much for them to really take it all in and apply it without being stressed out about what they need to change. And I think that's maybe one of the differences between working with like a super pro vocalist that's like, even like session vocalist sort of level, that they're able to keep those notes in mind and have it not distract them from the performance itself. Similar to how I think a lot of really great session musicians, you can give them specific notes about like the third verse, and they can do it from the top and still remember what's happening in the third verse comes, and it's not going to mess them up in the moment because it's so second nature to them to do the performance of it, that they're not in their heads and they can only just like focus on that moment when that moment comes up. And I think with vocalists, especially because of important how important the vocals are in the songs that that you and I work on anyway, and how exposed they tend to be because of the either the instrumentation or at least like the prominence that the vocals have in the arrangement. It's it comes down to, I think, the confidence that the singer has, not just in their voice and in their performance, but the confidence that they have in themselves to remember the things that they want to do differently and not have it bog them down, and not get in their own heads as they're singing, because
Yeah,
as they're singing verse one, as they're singing chorus one, as they're singing verse two, because they have this idea about going into chorus two, and they're so focused on not forgetting that thing and remembering that little like run that they did. And then there's all like the mental aspects of it. Um,
yeah,
which I think is, all that said, I think that's why, for at least the styles of music that I work on, which are more in like the pop adjacent side of things, I think doing it section by section tends to work best because we can really focus on creating as much drama in those moments as we can without having to try to remember a million things. But I think that would feel super awkward and forced if I was doing a bunch of, Americana or
yeah,
singer-songwriter stuff that is meant to be more natural. And
yes,
it comes down to, is it meant to feel like an artist in the room, or is it meant to feel like a hyper realistic like art piece? And like where on that spectrum is the song? And I think that for me is what kind
yeah,
of dictates what what vocal production, what vocal tracking preference I'm going to have
yeah.
in that moment.
And I would say also like if it's more of a pop production, Meaning, like, if it's less of a pop production, if it's more of like a folk thing, they're more likely to have worked it all out in advance and practiced it. And like, I feel like with pop
Yeah.
sessions, they're usually in the studio trying to figure out the best arrangement because it's,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's just
You arrange
generally
it
what
as you
happens.
go a lot of
Yeah.
times,
And I'm, well,
especially
yeah, and I'm
sorry.
usually holding all those ideas in my head while they're tracking. So,
No, totally. And that makes sense. I mean, yeah, that really goes back to pre-production and like what the pre-production process is for the artist. And some styles just have very different
yes.
pre-production systems, and
Yeah,
approaches, not just artist to artist, but I think even some styles of music kind of lend themselves more naturally to
totally.
different approaches to that.
Yeah, like band music is much more likely is much more likely the band has practiced a lot and gone over it and like performed it at bars even before
Mhm.
they've gotten into the studio to track it. And that's much more likely to be a normal, full length all the way through, and they know
Yeah.
exactly which part what they want to do for every single section, as opposed to a pop artist where usually you've worked out the whole arrangement for the first time, and they haven't been performing this with a band necessarily, and this is their first time coming up with what the actual vocal arrangement is, and it's in the recording session itself.
Yeah. And I know we intended to start talking about like the vocal like tracking and things, but I think we're kind of going a step before that into like the philosophy behind it and like the preparation
Mm,
that they do, which makes me think about like the blessing and the curse that pre-production and that live performance before recording gives you, because the people that don't do that prep and they don't do they don't rehearse as a band a bunch of times and perform live, like yeah, they're going to be a little bit less prepared for the session, but it opens up the possibilities of experimenting and trying new things, and like they're not married to parts. On the flip side,
yes,
the people that have
I don't
prepared a
know if like,
lot,
yeah,
it
yeah,
can be yeah, it can be a danger because sometimes they'll have something so ingrained in their muscle memory and their brain, and they're so familiar. It's like whatever the demo-itis of like before a demo, like rehearsalitis, I guess. They have there's that's the way that they play it. That's why they've played it with the band 200 times in rehearsal. They've played it on stage 50 times, and they go into the studio. And if you want to make a change that is going to be objectively, helping to tell the story better, helping to communicate the vision more, it's a bit more of a struggle because they have to consciously try to do something other than what they've spent all this time doing.
yeah, it really is a problem. The more you've listened to one thing, the more it's hard for you to hear new things. It's a real problem. Um, and I think it's something that we should all be trying to fight. We should all be open to new ideas and trying to get out of our demoitis, whatever whatever kind of demoitis it is. It's a real thing.
Yeah. So once we have it down, once we have the parts are recorded, and we get once we have the parts recorded, and we figured out what we want to do, and we get into the editing stage. Um, before I cut you off to start talking about, before I cut you off to start going more into the behind the scenes philosophy of this stuff, you were talking about Melodyne and how you really prefer tuning in
Yeah,
Melodyne.
I do. I don't know if I always prefer that I'm the one doing it, but
Mm-hmm.
and I have a bit of cold here, so sorry about that. But yeah, Melodyne, I find I'm just able to get whatever I want out of Melodyne. It's so flexible, and I'm able to use all the different tools and parameters to really coax a vocal into where it should be. And that doesn't. You have to. It's also, it's a blessing and a curse, because sometimes you can go too far, and you have to know when to stop. And if like a vocal feels really good and the emotion is being carried through, then you shouldn't always necessarily tune it perfect. You should maybe leave some stuff in. So finding the right balance between like exactly what you want and leaving the magic of a take in is definitely a balance I'm trying to find personally. And I would say that there was a time in my career where I was doing a lot more like straight up getting everything sound as in tune as possible, and also harmonies. And I'm less. I work less now in tuning than I used to. I'm definitely leaving more in there to be imperfect, because I kind of love that. Um, because I think we've gotten to be a bit too perfect, and I think it's a problem. Or it's like the robots are doing that anyway, so let's be human. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, but I am one who sometimes uses like auto tune or meta tune for backing vocals, not really for lead vocals, but to if you know, it's also a budget thing. Like if a client doesn't have a ton of money, they don't want to spend pay me for hours of editing. I could do 1 hour of editing and get a really good lead vocal, and kind of just auto tune the harmonies, which nobody's going to really notice that anyway. So that's sort of my editing thing. And sometimes I will do some manual chops to get like T's to like hit at the same time, or there's like
Yeah.
breaths right before a chorus, and there's like if they have like 8 backing vocals, or like there's like 3 parts and they're stacked or whatever, and you have like there's like it's big breaths and like where the S's
Yep.
fall and stuff like that. So yeah, these are all things that we have to pay attention to, and I'm a bit pedantic about, and I'll do some chopping also, not just tuning, and yeah, and that's my approach generally speaking to tuning,
Yeah.
editing vocals. How about you, Carl?
Well, I have more questions. I'm not done asking you questions
But
yet.
don't
I'm not
you? But you
done
do editing
done.
also, right?
I know, but I'll
I want
eventually
to hand it
transition
over to
this
you
into
at
me.
some point.
I know. I just have one last question,
Yeah.
and then I'll talk about myself for a long time. That's fine.
Okay,
But
great.
do you have anything in the editing process that you are neurotic about? Like, are there any particular things that, even when you want it to be quote unquote, natural or raw or loose, like there are still things that you have to
Hmm.
fix because it just grates at your soul? Like breaths. I say, like, maybe a good example would be like, breaths in backing vocals,
Well, a
right? And
big thing
like,
I learned from Philip Weinrobe is to leave breaths in, because the kind of music I want I usually make is trying to make people not freak out, and I do think that there's something calming about hearing breaths, and it feels more human. So I definitely try to leave breaths in. It doesn't mean I don't lower the gain on the breaths or make them or get rid of the ones that really don't sound good or are not in rhythm. So I do definitely leave breaths in a lot these days, and I didn't always. Yeah, another thing that's changed over the years. I've become less perfect, and I think less perfect is better,
yeah,
generally speaking, not always. But yeah, what's weird? I don't know. Like something I do a lot also in Melodyne is I will change the formant sometimes if or the I don't remember if it's formant or like, yeah, it's gotta be formant. Because sometimes, a singer will hit a note weird and it might sound too bright or too dark compared to the rest of it. And then just like a little bit of a formant shift can really make it sound like it really should. And so that's something
yeah,
that I'm also listening for. Um, and yeah, I don't actively listen for it because I'll hear it and I'll know right away because I'm like very attuned to this stuff. So yeah, but that's definitely something that I would say happens twice in every song. Is there'll be like a slight form shift just to make it sound like the person's voice and not like
mhm,
that weird note that they hit somehow.
yeah,
Yeah, I
totally.
don't know.
That makes sense. I think the one thing that I'm very I'm very kind of crazy about is going to be, well, yes, breaths in the backing vocals, but specifically the breath right before the first note, like right before the entrance of a backing vocal. Actually,
Lost you.
right before the chorus, if there's an entrance where the backing vocals come in, like right on the downbeat, then I
Carl,
want
I
to make
totally
sure
lost you.
that in that moment before it, I'm probably trying to create as much contrast as I can and making things feel smaller so that the chorus hits big. So then what I'll make sure that I do is I gotta get rid of any breaths or entrances in um any breaths or entrances in the backing vocal part, because I don't want to show my hands too soon. I don't want to let the listener know that there are backing vocals coming in. I want to make sure that when they come in, it is like a smack in the face and a surprise. And I think because of that too, this is something that I picked up from Andrew Maury years and years and years and years ago. I was doing a remix for a band that he had produced, and I remember the bass at the beginning of the chorus was like abruptly cut, like right exactly perfectly on the grid. And when he played it in solo, it had a little bit of like a click to it. Like it wasn't a clean cut. And I was like, oh man, I can't believe you let that slip through here. That's kind of sloppy. So I like fixed it. Air quotes for those listening to the podcast. I'm doing very aggressive air quotes. I fixed it, and all of a sudden, the chorus didn't feel as good, didn't hit as hard. And then I realized that was there to just add an extra little bit of like that punch, and like using the wrong thing, using like the click of a bad fade, again, air quotes, bad fade, to add a little bit more oomph to the downbeat. So I started doing that to backing vocals as well. So if there's a chorus,
Wow.
especially, I'm thinking like pop, this is like pop stuff, where the downbeat is very strongly in unison, like the downbeat of a chorus. And I not only am going to mute the vocal, or not only am I going to mute the any kind of like breaths or any kind of noise before it, because I don't want to give away that the chorus is coming. I don't want to give away that the backing vocals are going to enter. But then I'm happy to just like cut it, cut the clip right on the downbeat, and then it just adds that extra little bit of spice right on that downbeat.
Yeah,
So
that's a really
that's like
cool
a
hack.
yeah, I learned, and this is one of those few times where like I learned from somebody else's quote unquote mistake, and it's become like such a little hack for making your chorus hit harder. Same thing for
Yeah.
for bass, same thing for like synths if you're using any kind of like analog synths or guitars, anything that was recorded, not programmed, and needs to be like right on. Um Other than drum parts can get kind of funky if you don't get like, you know, the beginning of the snare or something. But usually it just like adds this extra bit of excitement to that downbeat that you can't get from, automating a volume boost or something.
Mm, that's so interesting. Wow. Yeah, that's a new one. That's a new one for me.
Yeah.
I guess it's like clipping the limiter, not the limiter, clipping your converters if you're a mastering engineer or something. I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. It's weird, but it usually sounds really awful in solo, but then you put it in the context and you're like, oh yeah, that was the right move.
And that's the lesson. It's
Yeah.
always in the context, right?
Always. Yeah. And I think because of that, like that's why, because of the context, I'm like you, I love Melodyne. I'm very particular with breaths and S's, and I'll still use more often than not, I end up using Melodyne and then autotune after it. With the autotune with a pretty slow retune speed, but just to give it kind of that, there's like a texture of autotune that I
Yeah,
like.
autotune has a
Um,
sound. It has a sound
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, and especially when it's not super tight and it doesn't sound like a Cher song, like it's or like Future or somebody. I don't know why I chose Cher. I should have picked a slightly more relevant recent artist. It was a
Whatever. We grew up
T-Pain,
with
and I
that
was like,
song. It's
no,
fine.
T-Pain's like that's over. I know. Um, but yeah, usually like the combination of those things. But when it comes to S's, this is where I am like maybe the most neurotic. I
Do
I
tell.
know we talked about this on the podcast probably years ago at this point, but I usually have 3 or 4 different de-essers on a vocal part, and all doing very little, but all doing very like specific things. And it's the analogy that I like to use for those of you that are either rolling your eyes or crying at my blasphemy here of using so many plugins. But I look at it like I call myself like a plugin minimalist, even though I use a lot of plugins on vocals. It's because each plugin is only doing one small specific thing. Like you could have one plugin on your vocals and it's like CLA Vox and it's like doing a whole bunch of shit. It makes it sound terrible. Or, you can use, you know, if I use multiple compressors that all have different feels and different amounts of, what it does, I'm able to have a lot less unintended consequences to the sound. And the same thing with the de-essers. So I like to use the analogy of like I have a big glass desk over at my mixing studio, and the studio's up on the 3rd floor of an old warehouse. And I could carry that glass top. I mean, it's pretty big. It's probably like 5 or 6 feet wide. I could have carried that up all those flights of stairs by myself, and I would have been able to get it up there. I mean, the downside would have been that I would be exhausted, and the likelihood of me either denting or scratching the walls or the table would have been pretty high. But if I asked 2 or 3 of my friends to help give me a hand to get up the stairs, we would have all been doing a lot less work. We'd all be a lot less tired, and the likelihood of those unintended consequences of bonking up against the wall, there's going to be way fewer chances of that happening. So I found that the minimalism, if we take it literally and think, oh, we only need one de-esser or one plugin, use as few plugins as possible. If we do that, then we're making that one plugin work way too hard. And
Hmm.
there's just like, there's always going to be some amount of diminishing returns with the de-esser or any kind of like multi-band anything,
Yeah.
whether it's like or Soothe or Pro MB, whatever. So if I'm able to do that, especially at different points along the chain, before compressors or after compressors or, wherever, then I'm able to get the more consistent sound that I want and not have to pay the price of having the S's either be too loud or too lispy and have it sound good for 80% of the song, but then sounds like pretty rough for 20%. Now I can get it to sound great for 100%. But really, the approach that I have for the de-essers and the compressors, like that kind of applies to how I approach mixing in general. So we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I think what we should do is maybe end this one for right now. I think we've been enjoying the two-parters lately, and I think we should end this right now, and then we'll get into a little bit more mixing next time.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, there's so much to unpack with vocals,
Yeah.
and this has been super fun. And there's so much more to get into when it comes to vocal production and mixing. So I'm here for it. I love getting nerdy with you, Carl. So let's
Well,
do a second parter.
I'm excited to get nerdier with you in the next episode. But until then, you're the man. And bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl.